Iran could attack the United States in a much more fearsome way.
New York could eventually be on Iran's hit list.
U.S. media reports
desperate new pleas come out of the country.
The oppressors and the oppressed.
Stop the killing.
Echoing Washington's repeated warnings.
Will carry out the attack.
American officials have labeled Syria and Iran as grave threats to global security. However, former U.S. Attorney General Ramsey Clark says the biggest threat to world peace is his own country's military and foreign policy. In an exclusive interview with RT, the lawyer and activist says America's next catastrophic mistake will likely be a war with Iran.
My impression is that Israel is pressing for an assault before the election, and that the Obama administration is resisting that without favoring Iran in any way, but simply as a domestic political matter.
Well, the U.S. can't really afford to get involved in another war, can it?
Well, I hope not. But that's not the way it works. I mean, you do crazy things, and that's why the world's such a mess. If Israel strikes and there's retaliation, that the United States will intervene. And I don't think it's Obama's choice, but I think he thinks that if he doesn't act with Israel, that it'll be too costly in the election, and he'll do it. You have to see the American system to know this, or to really understand it fully. If he loses this election, he's a failed president. All of his major decisions will be primarily affected by how they impact on the coming election. Because if he loses that election, anything he accomplished, and he accomplished a few things, health care and things like that, are better than they were. They're far from ideal, and far from what, if he has the Congress in the second session, he could do. But he struggled against enormous pressures. The Pentagon's ability, I mean, I've watched presidents President Johnson was one of them. Those guys come in from the Pentagon, he just thinks, my God, they know everything, I don't know nothing.
With respect to Syria, while speaking to the United Nations Security Council, the Syrian ambassador reportedly quoted a statement that you said nearly 22 years ago. He said, quote, "The UN, which was established to prevent the encouragement of war, has become itself a tool for war." How do you perceive the circumstances surrounding Syria right now, and the U.S. and European actions and campaign for some type of intervention?
Well, Syria's under extreme international and, to some degree, domestic pressure and violence for only one reason. And it's the same reason that gave us Iraq and Afghanistan and Libya. Syria is a part of the effort to eliminate every independent Arab government, independent of U.S. control.
You think that's the goal? It's not humanitarian reasons?
Oh my God, no. I mean, it's geopolitical. I mean, look what we did to poor Egypt, going back to Farouk, actually. Misery for the people for 4 brutal regimes, U.S. dominated.
Over the decades, you have faced a lot of criticism and have even been labeled by some as a traitor after providing legal defense to controversial figures such as Slobodan Milosevic and Saddam Hussein. You have described both of their trials as unfair and flawed. Last year, the world saw former Libyan leader Muammar Gaddafi murdered before receiving any trial. Who is to blame for that crime?
Well, in one sense, the American people are to blame because they let their government do it.
The American people, though, I mean, is the American government really acting on behalf of public opinion within the country? I mean,
no,
do you think that
the public doesn't have an opinion about things like that, really, you know?
Right. I mean, you know, you see the American people allowed their government to do it. Does the U.S. government really consult with what the people want before taking foreign policy measures?
I wouldn't call it consultation at all. I'd call it manipulation. The government tries to manipulate public opinion to support its policy, whatever it is. And in war, it's particularly, or in looking toward military action, it's particularly important to condition the public for it, which is basically asleep on those matters. I mean, you don't have a minor percentage of the American public has any daily concern about what's going on in the world unless it's a vacation trip or something like that.
Many have labeled Iran the new Iraq with respect to the U.S. media coverage of everything the U.S. officials are saying about Iran right now, which is quite similar to what was said about Iraq preceding U.S. intervention.
Well, the themes for assaulting a foreign country through history have almost always been similar, haven't they? Either they're bad guys, or they've done bad things, or they're mean to their people, or whatever. There are only a handful of themes that you build up before you intervene in a foreign nation, or they've been offensive to us, or they're preparing to assault, something like that. All of those countries have been victims of U.S. aggression because of U.S. geopolitical, economic interests. And our foreign policy is overwhelmingly driven by economic power in the United States. It has interests in areas where we intervene, basically for, you could call it business, but it's exploitation.
If these interventions can happen and former leaders do not face what you say, a fair trial, what's left of international law?
If Saddam Hussein had been like Mubarak and done what the United States told him to do, he would have been a pleasant personality in the United States media. And we'd have thought, hey, what nice people, what a great guy, you know, and all that. But because he wouldn't do what the United States wanted, he had to be taken out.
Is Bashar al-Assad destined for the same treatment? President
Assad is a gentle person.
There are a lot of people that would really disagree with the statement you just said, that President Assad is a gentle person.
I'm not sure. There are a lot of people that want the public to disagree, but if you look at his history, he left home, he went to England, he studied how to take care of people's eyes, he's interested in medicine and healing.
Well, right now there's no healing really taking place in Syria.
Right now he's trying to save his country as he sees it. And that's a rough business if you got people shooting at you.
And how do you think that's going to play out? Do you think that the Assad government will be able to withstand the mounting pressure? I mean, there were 137 member states of the UN that supported a General Assembly resolution, condemning Assad and endorsing the Arab League plan that essentially calls for him to step down.
The fact that 137 nations voted as they did doesn't mean that the people of those nations or even the government of those nations really feel that way. That's the influence of economic power of the United States, particularly, but to some degree NATO, the total economic power. Most of them don't have knowledge or an interest anyway, but they're going to go along with Uncle. That's what that's about. It's going to be tough, very tough. I don't know whether he'll make it or not.
You served as U.S. Attorney General under President Johnson, and having said that, I want to ask you about some domestic issues. When you read legislation such as the National Defense Authorization Act, what impression do you get of democracy in America now?
Well, I get two impressions from reading it. One, that we live in a military-dominated society, and that the people are unaware of it. That they see terrorism as a threat, you know, and 9/11 has created a level of fear that has been exploited and sustained, but an informed people would never go along with that.
How has the U.S. political process changed since you became a part of it nearly half a century ago?
Well, it's grown consistently stronger at the national level, and the states have become less powerful.
What was your biggest disappointment that made you step back from politics?
Well, my biggest disappointment for our administration was the Vietnam War. It was head and shoulders above anything else. It was a great tragedy.
Many have compared the demonstrations and the rallies that took place during the Vietnam War to the Occupy Wall Street movement. What do you think will come out of the Occupy movement? Do you think it will be much of a political or social game changer? Or do you think it will just be pretty much a tool to let the steam out?
I think the Occupy Wall Street movement has an enormous potential. You take the anti-war movement, or take the civil rights movement, it's only people involved about race. You know, if you're black, yeah, it's great. If it's war, if your kids in the war are likely to be drafted, or if you're just a pacifist. But when you finally have a major population hurting so bad from the economy, or concerned so much about the justice or injustice of the economy, you're reaching 99%, they say, you know, you're surely reaching 90%. So I think it has enormous potential. I think it's got to study harder what it's trying to do. It's got to appeal a little bit less to selfish interests and more to the general interest. Because underlying it is a selfish interest that I want a bigger stake in the economy. It has a Me Too motivation that promises in the long run more of the same rather than more better.
Mr. Clark, thank you very much for your time.
Yeah.